2014 didn't get off to the kind of start Alabama's football team wanted, but there are some silver linings. We'll talk about it all as we go inside the Tide on Tider Insider TV next.
Go inside the Crimson Tide. Tider Insider TV with Rodney Orr and Gary Harris.
It had to end sometime. Last night, the Florida State Seminoles put a stop to the SEC's 7-year BCS championship winning streak. Hueytown's Jameis Winston threw a touchdown pass with 13 seconds left to seal the deal. 34-31 was the final score, and there is a new king of college football in the final year of the BCS. And with that, we say good evening, everybody. Welcome into Tider Insider TV alongside Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com. I'm Gary Harris. Good to be back with you after a couple weeks off. Our program presented every week by Buffalo Rock. And tonight, Rodney, you know, New Year's resolution, and mine, like a lot of people, at the top of the list to drop a few pounds. So with that in mind, we're going Diet Pepsi tonight. How's that?
It's good.
Not
quite as cold, doesn't need to be.
Huh?
Doesn't need to be cold.
It's good.
Yeah.
That's right. Last time I had icicles. She said it was a little too cold for you. Make sure that didn't happen. All right. Some pain has been taken away for some Alabama fans in this state. You know how it is. Since Auburn didn't win the title, some are feeling a little bit better. But still, Bama fans had to watch the Tide go down in New Orleans last week at the hands of Oklahoma. Let's talk some about the Sugar Bowl. Rodney, this was a game that Alabama, as it's been the case all season, was a big favorite. Bob Stoops and Nick Saban, good friends. But you know what? Oklahoma had a chip on their shoulder. We talked about that. We knew they would be ready. They had caught a lot of heat for not coming up big in BCS games recently. They prepared, had a great plan offensively. Trevor Knight, their quarterback, was sensational. And Alabama got off to a fast start, but Oklahoma really took control and controlled the game. Alabama had some opportunities to get back in it, but, you know, I'm not going to sit here and try to sugarcoat this one. I thought on that night Oklahoma was a better football.
They really were, Gary. They played really fast. I mean, their defense, you could see the speed they had. Trevor Knight, I mean, what a night he had. I mean, he was incredible. He was accurate. You know, he got the ball in the right spots. And again, you know, you saw a team, as you talked about, Gary, that was hungry. I mean, here's a team, as you mentioned, that they've struggled in the big games. You know, Bob Stoops has been labeled Big Game Bob, kind of sarcastically, for the fact that, you know, he's struggled in some of the bigger games. And, you know, this was very important for their program. And, you know, people talk about Oklahoma. That's a tradition-rich program. It's one of the 5 to 7 top programs in the country, you know, along with the Alabamas and the Nebraskas and Michigans and what have you. But so certainly they've got a lot of pride, too, in terms of their tradition. And just a few years ago, 2009, they played in that national championship game against Florida the year before Alabama went and won it in 2000. Actually, Alabama won in 2009. They played, after the 2008 season, they played Florida in the national championship game. So, you know, they've had a lot of recent success, too.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? By Oklahoma winning that game, it allowed them to finish in the top 10 for the 38th time in their history. Alabama finished in the top 10, 6 and 7 in the AP poll for the 38th time in their history. How about that? Of course, if Alabama had won, it would have knocked Oklahoma out of the top 10, and the Tide would have that one top 10 finish ahead of the Sooners. But there you see a recap. A.J. McCarron had 387 yards passing. What a game. But 301 of that came in the first half. A couple of touchdowns, but also 2 costly interceptions. A great night for Derrick Henry. The freshman, 161 all-purpose yards, over 100, or right at 100 on the ground on just 8 carries and 2 touchdowns. His coming out party. Amari Cooper, we were told to look out that Alabama was going to throw the ball a lot before the game. He had a big night with 121 yards and receptions. And Eddie Jackson, back at the starting quarterback position, had a great stat line with 10 tackles. And you know Cooper, Jackson, Henry are all back. Okay, now after the game, of course, a lot of interest in what Alabama had to say. You know, they don't lose a lot. First time this senior class has ever lost back-to-back games. Let's go into the locker room, into the post-game podium, and hear what the coaches and players had to say.
Even though we outgained them in the game, we probably gained enough yards, but we had 4 turnovers that led to 28 points, and 1 turnover in the red zone and 1 missed field goal in the first half, and those things probably were, you know, a big difference in the game. So, but we're all responsible for that.
Put it all on me. I had 2 turnovers, ended up scoring 14 points, and we lost by 14. So, you know, that's football.
And certainly you can't put it all on A.J. It's a team effort when you win and you lose. This senior class, though, man, what a resume they put together. Alabama fans so appreciative. They go out as one of the winningest senior classes in college football history. 46 wins, 6 losses, 2 BCS national championships. And some of these guys who are fifth-year seniors like A.J. and Anthony Steen, they won a ring as redshirt freshmen in 2009, so they actually have 3 national championship rings and a great run. And, you got to remember them for that. But, again, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Alabama started fast in that game against Oklahoma, but they, as has been the case in some games this year, they just didn't seem to be able to, continue the momentum, and that had a lot to do with it. Rodney, turnovers, 4 of them that led to 28 Oklahoma points.
Well, you look at that one there. That play right there, Gary, was huge. I'll tell you why, because Alabama jumped out to a 7-0 lead real early. Landon Collins got the pick, and then on the very next play, A.J. turns it over. And then this was right before the half when Alabama was driving a little bit, and that pick set Oklahoma up for another score late in the first half. So, I mean, those things certainly were devastating. Again, you had the fumble when T.J. Yeldon inside the 10-yard line dropped the ball, and here Geno Grissom picks it up, and O.J. Howard makes the tackle. But, those kind of things, 4 turnovers led to 28 points. That's certainly a difference in the game. But also the fact that, listen, you got to give Oklahoma credit again. We talked about Trevor Knight. They moved the ball offensively, threw the ball really well. And, defensively, they played well enough in the second half. They sacked A.J., 7 times? So all around, they played really well.
Yeah, Ronnie, it's easy to see why Alabama lost the game. 4 turnovers leading to 28 points. Tide, as you mentioned, couldn't protect A.J. McCarron at the end of the day. And let's not forget what an outstanding performance, as you mentioned. Oklahoma's redshirt freshman quarterback Trevor Knight, who'd been known as their read option guy, threw the ball. Reminded me of Stephen Garcia for South Carolina a few years ago. He made every throw. He was on his game. And that's what it takes to beat Alabama.
It does. It does. Every time Alabama loses in the last 4 or 5 years, a quarterback's had maybe his career game.
You got to play really, really well if you're going to knock off the Tide. All right, no more talking about that game. It's out of the way. Let's look ahead. Next on Tider Insider TV, we'll start doing just that. And Thursday was a big day for Alabama on the recruiting front. We're going to have some future Tiders making their presence felt in the Under Armour All-American game. We'll discuss it next. And coming up as well, we're welcoming your phone calls, emails, and tweets. You see the information on the screen on how you can interact with Tider Insider TV. So go ahead and take note of that. Give us a call, send us an email, or contact us on Twitter. We'll be right back with the only show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide. The one, the only Tider Insider TV returns right after this break. We're back on TITV for several Alabama commitments. Cam Robinson, Deshaun Hand, Cameron Sims, and some others. They really stood out in the Under Armour All-American game last Thursday. It turned out to be a pretty good day for the Tide coaches as well, as they picked up a couple more pledges. Rodney, one really wasn't a surprise, but another, Tony Brown, the top player in Texas. Well, it was going to be LSU for a long time. Texas A&M tried to get in there, but he surprised some by committing to Alabama.
Well, again, Tony Brown, as you mentioned, Gary, one of the top 2 players in the state of Texas from Beaumont-Ozen High School. I mean, he's, as you mentioned, one of the top defensive cornerbacks in the entire country. It came down to Alabama, LSU, and Ohio State. He's a great track star. He's an international silver medalist in the 110-meter hurdles. Look how fast he is. Look at that. Who sped that up? But no, really, he does have legitimate speed. Certainly one of the top sprinters, hurdlers in the country in the high school ranks. And it was a huge pickup. His sister runs track. She's on track scholarship at LSU. A lot of people automatically assume that's where he would end up. But again, the Nick Saban factor. He loves Nick Saban, and I think that played a big role.
And Charlie Strong, hired on yesterday at Texas, trying to call Tony Brown and get him to switch, but he's already on campus at Alabama, folks, so don't freak out. He's here. All right, Brown by the numbers. You see a great size there, 6 feet, 182. Could play either corner or safety.
Actually, he's up to 198. He's gotten bigger.
How about that? And he's an early enrollee, Rodney, and that's good news. More on that as far as the early enrollees are concerned coming up. The second guy who picked Alabama on Thursday, a familiar name, because he had picked Alabama. So this is the second time for him, but he decommitted from the Tide. But Lawrence Hootie Jones decides to come back to the class of 2014. We've talked a lot about Hootie, but this is a guy that has played mainly corner in high school, but like Brown, he can play either safety or cornerback, so you're getting some versatility with both these guys. And this is a young man that'll really stick you.
Yeah, he's 6'1", 220. Gary has really good size. He's a guy that, could possibly grow into a linebacker. He had a really good week at the Under Armour practices. from Monroe, Neville, Louisiana. He's right in the same community where Alabama got those other guys, Cameron Sims, Cameron Robinson, and you know, he's an excellent prospect. Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, a lot of schools nationally recruited him. He's regarded as one of the top prospects, top 100 prospects in the country.
And there you see Hootie by the numbers there, good size, as Rodney spoke about, and a guy that is, once again, an early enrollee. So a big day for those guys. They're both enrolled as part of, as of today, getting ready to begin classes at Alabama. Of course, several Alabama commitments participated in the Army All-American game on Saturday. But let's talk about these early enrollees, Rodney, and we know that you look forward to seeing the entire freshman class, but if you can get in January, go through spring practice, let's be frank, it gives you a much better opportunity to play than a guy that doesn't.
Yeah, we've seen it, you know, many times before through the last several years since Nick Saban has kind of got this ball rolling in terms of getting in midterm, mid-year transfers or enrollees, as you call them. Tony Brown, we've talked about him. David Cornwell, one of the top quarterbacks in the country from Norman, Oklahoma. He's coming off a knee injury, Gary, that ended his season early, so he's going to rehab here a little bit more. How much he'll go through spring, we'll see. You see some of the other guys, two of the bigger guys coming in. DJ Petway, Jaron Reed, two junior college players. We know all about DJ Petway. He came here from Pensacola Catholic a few years ago, transferred out, went to East Mississippi. He and Jaron Reed were stars there on the defensive line this past year, led East Mississippi to the Junior College National Championship. Cam Robinson, I think he's one of the key recruits, maybe the key recruit of this class in terms of Alabama needs a future left tackle. And I think he's a guy that certainly you could point to that has that potential to be one of the best. You know, he's a guy, you know, a lot of people have compared him maybe to a Cyrus Kwanjo and Andre Smith in terms of that's the level of potential he has. And so I think that was a huge pickup. And again, they go to Louisiana, they beat LSU for a guy like that, and that's very difficult to do.
All right, next on Tider Insider TV, we're opening the phone lines for your questions and comments. Plus, we'll look ahead to the class of 2015, and a big-time member of that recruiting class is already making some noise. And we're welcoming your phone calls, emails, and tweets. You see the information on your screen. Interact with Tider Insider TV right now. Go ahead and give us a call so you can get on the line. We'll talk to you next, or send us an email or contact us on social media. We'll be right back with the show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, Tider Insider TV, presented by Buffalo Rock. Quarterback Ricky Town is one of 5 commitments for the class of 2015 already in the fold for the Tide. He was impressive this past weekend at the Los Angeles Regional Elite 11 quarterback competition. One website called him the most impressive performer out of 65 quarterbacks. He picked Alabama over Stanford, USC, UCLA, and just about everybody else in college football. So great start to the class of 2015 for the Tide. Right now it's time to give the show over to you, and let's start off by going to Fayette County and talking with Gary. Hey, Gary, what's going on, man?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Good. Go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to know what that linebacker from Texas, Alabama had committed so long, all of a sudden he went to UCLA.
Well, it's a good question, Gary. I mean, he had been committed since May, and I really thought he was a strong commitment when you consider some of the ties that Alabama kind of has to that high school out there in Galena Park, North Shore, Texas. I mean, DeAndre White, the current wide receiver, was also a player at that school, and Alabama has some kind of other connections out there. And it just, for whatever reason, he decided to go to UCLA. I think a lot of it had to do with he has a really good friend, a guy that he grew up with, who's going to UCLA, was entering school early, an offensive lineman there at his high school, and I think he kind of just wanted to join him. You know, he made an official visit with that player, Gary, the first week of December. And I think it was kind of a surprise visit. I don't think a lot of people knew he was going to take that visit, and went out there, had a good time. Came here the next week, said his commitment to Alabama was solid, and then, you know, all of a sudden Friday night he decided that he was going to flip to UCLA. So that's kind of the way it is. And he was going to be here, enrolled early, like several of the other guys that you mentioned earlier. So that was a little bit of a loss. I thought he was kind of a C.J. Mosley type looking linebacker on the high school level. So, again, big pickup for UCLA.
As we know, in recruiting, you win some, you lose some. Thanks for the phone call, Gary. Let's take an email. This is from Tim Lansford in Northport. Can you talk about Lane Kiffin being in T-Town recently? Well, Tim, you know, the thing about Lane Kiffin, whether you like him or you don't, he knows offensive football. This is a guy that was tabbed at 32 years of age to be the head coach of the Oakland Raiders by Al Davis, who knows something about coaching talent. So I think they brought him in to take a look at everything they were doing. You know, will it lead to a coaching position for Kiffin in the future at the University of Alabama on Nick Saban's staff? I don't know that answer, but certainly I think it's a good idea to bring a guy in who's been a head coach at Tennessee, USC, head coach in the NFL, to kind of do some quality control scouting on your offense.
Yeah, the thing about Kiffin, and outside of that question, the real thing that impressed me that I'll never forget about him is the job he did with Jonathan Crompton at Tennessee in the 2009 season. I mean, Jonathan Crompton, a highly recruited player, had been a disaster at Tennessee as a quarterback, and the job that Lane Kiffin did in the first 6 weeks of that season, turning that kid around his senior year, was really amazing. So, as you mentioned, Gary, he certainly is a guy that knows how to develop players.
Well, you know what? He does. He knows quarterback. So I think it was a good idea to bring him in, take a look at what Alabama is doing. And again, I know there's some speculation out there about him possibly joining the staff, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. Well, coming up, we'll give you a preview of what's coming up in the next few weeks on Tider Insider TV, and more of your phone calls, emails, and tweets. Again, the information on how you can reach us is on the screen right there. So give us a call or email or interact with us on Twitter. We'll be right back with the only show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide. Tider Insider TV will return in 2 minutes. Well, the 2013 football season is over, but really, football season never ends in Alabama. Check out what we're working on starting next week. We'll start our 2014 spring practice countdown. We'll look at a unit per week leading up to the start of spring practice. We'll start next week with the special team units. There'll be some changes there. That's next Tuesday on TITV. Rodney, let's get right back to the phone lines, and let's take a phone call from Tommy in Talladega. Hey, Tommy, how are you?
Pretty good. How y'all?
Very well. Go ahead, Tommy.
Like to know who's going to replace Cyrus Quanjo. We need somebody bad.
Well, Tommy, first of all, I don't think there's any guarantee that Cyrus Quanjo is going to go pro. If he does, Rodney, there's some candidates.
Well, yeah, you're right. I think that was a good point there. We don't know yet. But certainly we mentioned Cam Robinson, the true freshman. Now, it's very difficult for a true freshman to come in and start. But the good thing is, as Gary alluded to earlier, when you get in early, you go through spring practice, you have an opportunity to get them acclimated to everything. It gives you an opportunity to learn the playbook, so to speak, and to try to polish up yourself as a football player and get prepared for fall camp. So I think that's a big edge for a guy like Cam Robinson. They have other guys, Gary, that certainly could possibly, get looks there. Grant Hill's a guy that's really versatile. I'm not saying he's going to end up there. He's played right tackle. He could play guard. But he certainly could be a guy that maybe gets a look there. And I know they're going to look at a lot of guys. We just threw out a couple there.
All right, let's take an email question. And this one is coming to us from Leslie and Hoover. Do you guys think anyone will turn pro early? Well, we just mentioned Cyrus Quanjo. He is a possibility. The big left tackle. Now, here's the deal. As you look at Clinton Dix, Rodney, we'll run out some others. You have to have completed 3 years in college. Now, one of those could be a redshirt year, but you have to have had 3 years, so it's either true juniors or redshirt sophomores. Quanjo's a possibility. Jeffrey Pagan, Hubbard, all guys that might look at entering the NFL draft. Right?
Yeah, I think all three of those. Now, I don't know about Pagan. Possibly there's been a lot of talk about that. Certainly he could go, too, so it'll be interesting to keep an eye on him. You mentioned Clinton Dix. I mean, certainly I think that's going to happen. Adrian Hubbard. There's been a lot of talk that'll probably happen as well. DePriest
has already announced that he's coming back. And again, folks, I know people get a little antsy about this, but it's just part of these type of programs. When you recruit these high-caliber athletes, some of them are going to go pro early. We'll keep you updated on who decides to do that. All right. Thanks so much for all of our callers, emailers, and Twitter followers. We do have one more caller, Rodney. And this is our buddy Plato. I don't know what he goes by, but he calls us a lot. What's going on, man?
Hey, good evening. It's Plato.
All right, Plato.
Other than Marlon Humphrey and Matt Elam, are there any other prospects that we may be involved with for our last few spots?
Well, I mean, certainly I think there's some guys that could be in the mix. Now, how strongly at this point, I mean, I think that kind of remains to be seen. It depends on what direction I think Alabama wants to go in some cases. And, maybe a guy like Bryson Allen Williams, a linebacker out of the state of Georgia, actually from Ellenwood, Georgia, who played at the same high school as Brandon Green, a current player here at Alabama. And, he's been committed to South Carolina for quite some time. But, he's told me yesterday that he plans on visiting Alabama on the 23rd of January. Gary, he's a guy that maybe if Alabama decides to look for some sort of linebacker, maybe to replace that spot where Whitley left. Rashawn Evans, a lot of people think he might be the best player in the state along with Marlon Humphrey, the linebacker from Auburn. He may visit, is expected to make an official visit here. I know it's going to be very difficult to get him away from Auburn because of it, certainly lives there, but also his dad played there for a while, Alan Evans. So, we'll see what happens. But, yeah, there's some other options out there still available.
All right. Thanks for the phone calls. Thanks for the emails. And as always, we'd love you to join us on the program. If you didn't get in tonight, again, try next week, and we'll try to fit you in. We'll welcome you with your participation on the show every time we do it. All right, here is a look at the city of Tuscaloosa live from our tower cam. It is chilly again tonight, but we hope we've warmed you up a little bit with Alabama football news. We'll be back to wrap up this edition of PITV right after this.